If you fix this engine, I'll marry you," the powerful CEO laughed, never believing a single dad in a grease-stained shirt could actually do it. But what happened next didn't just shock her. It changed both of their lives forever. Stay with us, because this story will take you from laughter to heartbreak to an ending you'll never forget. And if you've ever believed that love and family can come from the most unexpected places, don't just watch. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story too. The late autumn sun dipped low over the quiet suburb, its light slanting across the cracked pavement outside Carter's garage. Inside, the smell of motor oil and old rubber lingered like a second skin. Daniel Carter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, leaned under the hood of a battered pickup. His daughter Emily, 8 years old with curious eyes too big for her small face, sat cross-legged on a stool, scribbling in her notebook. She hummed softly, a tune Daniel barely recognized, something her late mother used to sing when the nights felt unbearably long. The sound of tires crunching gravel made them both turn. A sleek black car, low to the ground and gleaming like liquid steel, coasted into the lot. The emblem on its grille spoke of money, power, and a world far from this garage. Behind the tinted window, a woman's silhouette sat rigid, her posture all angles and precision. The door swung open, and out stepped Clara Harrington. Her presence seemed to pull the air taut, like the moment before a storm. Dressed in a tailored coat, heels clicking against the uneven ground, she looked as out of place as a swan in a mud pond. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, his instinctive modesty at odds with the elegance standing before him. Clara's tone was brisk, her words clipped. "It just died on me," she said, nodding toward the car. "The engine won't start. I don't have time to wait for a dealership tow." Her assistant hovered a step behind, glancing around the garage with a faint sneer. Daniel gave a simple nod. "Pop the hood. I'll take a look." He didn't ask for introductions, didn't comment on her car's worth, didn't treat her differently than he would anyone else who limped in with engine trouble. That strangely seemed to irritate her. Clara watched him bend over the engine, his grease-stained hands moving with quiet confidence. Something about the scene, the contrast between his worn boots and her polished heels, between his world of bolts and her world of boardrooms, made her lips twitch with amusement. "You really think you can fix this?" she asked, the sharpness in her tone blunted by a dry laugh. Daniel didn't look up. "An engine's an engine. They all talk if you listen long enough." Emily giggled softly, swinging her legs, but her laughter faded as Clara tilted her head, eyes narrowing, and uttered the words that would shift everything. "If you fix this engine, I'll marry you." The sentence slipped out half in jest, half in provocation. Her assistant stifled a laugh, certain the mechanic would shrink under the absurdity of it. But Daniel just paused, a rag in his hand, and blinked once. For a brief second, silence filled the garage, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. Emily's eyes widened. Children have a way of taking words at face value, of hearing promises where adults hide jokes. She stared at Clara with unguarded awe, as if her father had just been handed the chance to rewrite their lives. Daniel, however, simply lowered his head back into the engine bay. "Let's see what's really wrong here," he murmured. To him, the vow was nothing more than noise, another rich person's quip tossed into the wind. He didn't chase fantasies, not since his wife's laughter had faded into hospital walls. Still, Emily's gaze followed him, her small heart snagged on those strange words. She scribbled in her notebook, "Daddy will fix it. Daddy can fix anything." Clara, for reasons she couldn't explain, felt a ripple in her chest. She hadn't meant it. Hadn't meant anything at all by her words. It was a throwaway line, armor against the quiet vulnerability that engines and garages and grease-stained men stirred in her. But as she watched Daniel methodically sort through wires and valves, she wondered why she felt the smallest flicker of doubt. What if, she thought, he actually could? Outside, the evening deepened, the last of the sunlight spilling across the hood like molten gold. In that glow, a line had been drawn. A promise, a dare, a joke, whatever it was, it had landed. Daniel Carter, the humble single dad who asked for nothing but enough to keep his daughter clothed and fed, had unknowingly stepped into a story larger than either of them could yet imagine. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the garage as Daniel worked, but inside him, another kind of noise stirred, the echo of years that had carved him into the man he was now. Long before Carter's garage became his second home, Daniel had walked a different path. He once sat in lecture halls with the dream of becoming a mechanical engineer, designing machines instead of fixing their broken remnants. He had been bright, ambitious, and full of plans. But plans had a way of unraveling when life demanded sacrifice. His wife, Sarah, had fallen ill not long after Emily was born. The medical bills piled up faster than he could count, and Daniel had left his studies without a backward glance. He took whatever jobs came, construction, delivery, odd shifts, before finally landing back in the one place that always made sense, the garage. By the time Emily turned 4, Sarah was gone, leaving behind only the warmth of her lullabies and the ache of her absence. Daniel carried that ache in silence, a weight pressed down with every wrench he turned. He never remarried. He never even considered it. His world narrowed to a single compass point: Emily. Every decision, every long night, every grease-stained day revolved around the small girl who needed him to be father and mother all at once. He often wondered if he had given up too much of himself. But then Emily would look up from her drawings and smile. In that smile he saw Sarah's eyes, and he knew it was enough. Clara Harrington, standing a few feet away with her arms folded, didn't see any of this. To her, Daniel was just another man in coveralls, a stranger bent over an engine. But beneath her sharp exterior, Clara's own history churned like a storm. She had been raised in marble halls where power was traded like currency. Her father built Harrington Global from nothing, and her mother, elegant and exacting, had played hostess to board members and diplomats. Clara learned early that love and loyalty could be leveraged. That vulnerability was a weakness in the world her parents built. She had watched her older brother groomed to inherit the company, only to falter under pressure. When her father turned to her instead, she rose to the challenge, burying her softer edges in steel. By 30, she was CEO, and by 32, she had already outpaced the men who doubted her. But triumph came with a price. Suitors circled her not for who she was, but for what she represented: wealth, power, access. Clara had been engaged once, a carefully orchestrated arrangement that promised to merge empires. She had broken it off weeks before the wedding, unable to silence the sickening knowledge that it was her signature, not her heart, that mattered. Since then, she had armored herself with distance and wit, wielding sharp remarks to cut through unwanted attention. Her laughter earlier, "If you fix this engine, I'll marry you," had been more reflex than intention, a way to hold herself above the intimacy that suddenly pressed in when Daniel met her gaze without flinching. What unnerved her most was not his silence but his steadiness. Most men either stumbled to impress her or recoiled from her coldness. Daniel did neither. He simply carried on, as though her wealth or status meant nothing. The sound of a child's voice broke her thoughts. Emily had padded closer, notebook clutched in hand. She looked up at Clara with the kind of openness that only children possess. "My mommy used to say, if Daddy fixes things, he can fix hearts too." Clara blinked, caught off guard. The words hung in the air, heavier than the scent of gasoline, reaching past the armor she wore. For a moment, her chest tightened in a way she hadn't felt since she lost her own mother. Clara had been 16 then, old enough to understand, but too young to carry the hollow silence that followed. Her mother's lullabies had vanished into the walls of the Harrington estate, replaced by the clipped tones of staff and the relentless ticking of clocks. She had never heard anyone outside her family mention fixing hearts. Until now, she looked at Daniel differently, her gaze lingering on the lines at the corners of his eyes, the set of his shoulders, the quiet resilience etched into every movement. He was more than a mechanic. He was a man who had endured, who had chosen love over ambition, who had built his life not on empires, but on the fragile strength of fatherhood. Clara didn't say anything, but something shifted. She turned back to her car, pretending to check her phone, though the screen blurred. Daniel, unaware of the storm within her, continued his work, his hands steady, his focus unwavering. Emily's words had planted a seed neither of them could ignore. By the time the sky outside deepened into a dusky violet, Daniel had stripped the sleek machine down to what looked like its bare bones. Clara, standing a few feet away with arms crossed, had long since stopped scrolling her phone. Her assistant had grown impatient, muttering about calling the dealership. But every time Daniel adjusted a valve or tested a wire, Clara caught a glimpse of something different. A man who didn't flinch at challenges. Sweat beaded on Daniel's forehead as he leaned over the engine. He could feel Emily's gaze on him, her faith as steady as her mother's had once been. He whispered under his breath, almost like a prayer, "All right, let's listen." Then he placed his hand lightly against the engine's block. To anyone else, it might have looked absurd, but Daniel wasn't guessing. He was listening. He had always said machines spoke to him in rhythms and vibrations, the way some people heard music. Tonight, the car spoke in halting notes. A misaligned timing chain, a faulty sensor hidden deep behind the glossy facade. Problems most mechanics wouldn't find without days of testing. Daniel improvised. With tools worn smooth from years of use, he adjusted, calibrated, and replaced only what was necessary. When he finally turned the key, the engine roared back to life with a smoothness that made the assistant's jaw drop. Clara, usually unflappable, blinked in disbelief. She had been told by her own manufacturer that the issue required a complete engine replacement. Costly, time-consuming, and nearly impossible without specialized equipment. Yet here, in a garage that smelled of dust and motor oil, one man had done in hours what her boardroom experts insisted could not be done. The assistant let out a low whistle. "Impossible," he muttered. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She remembered her careless challenge. "If you fix this engine, I'll marry you." The joke suddenly felt less like armor and more like a promise she hadn't meant to make. Daniel simply wiped his hands, offered the keys, and said quietly, "She'll run smooth now. Just needed someone to pay attention." His words carried no arrogance, no demand, only the quiet dignity of a man who did what he said he would. Emily clapped her hands and beamed. "Daddy fixed it! I knew he would." Daniel's gaze softened as he ruffled her hair, but his expression held no triumph, only relief. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. For the first time in years, she didn't know how to stand in her own power. Her assistant tried to laugh it off, muttering about miracles and backwoods tricks. But Clara silenced him with a glance. Something about the way Daniel stood there, unassuming and steady, made her feel exposed. "That was extraordinary," she managed, her voice lower, almost reverent. Daniel shrugged. "Just part of the job." But it wasn't just part of the job, and she knew it. He had done more than fix an engine. He had dismantled a piece of her certainty. The belief that money and experts held all the solutions. He had reminded her of something her mother used to say, "Pay attention to the quiet ones. They carry truths the world forgets." Before she could stop herself, Clara added, "I'd like you and your daughter to come to an event tomorrow night, a company gala. It's a way of saying thank you." Daniel frowned, caught off guard. He had no interest in ballrooms or chandeliers. That world belonged to people like Clara, not to men with grease on their hands. He was about to decline when Emily tugged his sleeve, eyes shining. "Daddy, can we go? Mommy used to say she wanted me to see the big lights someday." Daniel's chest tightened. Sarah's voice echoed in memory, promises of showing their little girl the world beyond the garage. He swallowed hard and nodded once. "All right, for her." Clara exhaled slowly, as if relieved by his answer, though she wasn't sure why it mattered so much. She handed him an embossed card with the event details. Tomorrow, then. And Daniel, thank you. He inclined his head but said nothing more. As she slid into her car, the engine purred beneath her, strong and certain, a living testament to the man she had underestimated. Driving away, Clara caught sight of Emily waving through the rearview mirror. The child's innocence struck her like a chord, the kind that lingers long after the music ends. For Daniel, the night ended with silence, the kind that carried both pride and unease. He had fixed a machine, yes, but something deeper had shifted too, though he couldn't yet name it. The Harrington Global Gala shimmered with excess. Crystal chandeliers bathed the grand ballroom in golden light. Orchestral music flowed like wine, and guests in gowns and tailored suits moved with the practiced grace of people born into power. For Daniel and Emily, stepping through those doors felt like walking into another world. Daniel's suit was modest, borrowed from his late father, and Emily wore a pale blue dress Clara had sent earlier that morning, with a note that simply read, "For Emily, so she'll shine." Her small hand gripped Daniel's tightly as they entered, her eyes wide with wonder at the towering ceilings and the swirl of silk. Clara appeared at the top of the marble staircase like a vision, elegant in a dark emerald gown, her hair swept up, every inch the untouchable CEO. Yet when her eyes found Daniel and Emily, something softened. She descended toward them, ignoring the whispers that followed. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly, her gaze lingering on Emily's delighted expression. Daniel inclined his head, unsure how to stand in this world of cameras and champagne. "For her," he replied, but the night would not remain gentle for long. At the center of the ballroom, Clara's board members and partners circled, their smiles sharpened like knives. One man in particular, a longtime rival who had never hidden his disdain for her leadership, raised his glass and sneered. "Quite the guest list tonight, Clara. Tell me, is Harrington Global recruiting mechanics now?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, brittle and cruel. Daniel's jaw tightened. He reached for Emily's hand, prepared to walk out, unwilling to be paraded as a joke. Clara opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Emily did something no one expected. She stepped forward, her small voice carrying in the hush that followed. "My daddy can fix anything." The ballroom quieted. Her eyes shone. And then, with the innocence of a child untouched by cynicism, she began to sing. The melody was fragile, tremulous at first, but it held something pure. Daniel froze, his heart lurching as he recognized it. The lullaby Sarah used to sing at Emily's bedside. But there was more. Across the ballroom, Clara's face went white. Her glass slipped slightly in her hand, and she pressed it to her lips to hide the trembling. The song was not just Sarah's, it was her mother's. Clara's mother had written it in a notebook years ago, a melody she used to hum at night before the household turned into a fortress of power. It had been their secret, one she believed had died with her mother's passing. Yet here, in the mouth of a mechanic's daughter, the lullaby lived again. Gasps echoed through the hall as Emily's voice grew stronger. Reporters' cameras flashed, capturing the surreal scene. The daughter of a mechanic singing a lullaby that carried the CEO back to her childhood. When the last note faded, silence filled the air like a prayer. Then the rival's mocking grin faltered. Clara lowered her glass slowly, tears streaking her carefully composed face. She stepped forward, voice trembling. Where did you learn that song?" Emily blinked, unafraid. "From Mommy. She said her best friend taught it to her a long time ago. She told me it was special." The revelation cracked open the past like glass under strain. Clara staggered, memories flooding. Her teenage years, a friend who had once visited the estate, a kind-eyed woman named Sarah. She remembered her mother humming as the two girls laughed, the lullaby weaving them together in a fleeting moment of peace. The truth struck her like lightning. Daniel's late wife had been her mother's confidant, and through her, Emily carried a piece of Clara's lost world. Murmurs rose in the ballroom. The cameras didn't miss Clara's tears, nor the way she reached out, almost unconsciously, to brush Emily's hair back from her face. Daniel watched, torn between pride and unease, the weight of the moment pressing against him. Clara turned to the crowd, her voice steadying. "This man is no joke. He is the reason my car still runs, and his daughter just gave back to me something I thought I had lost forever." A ripple moved through the audience, the cruel smiles dimming. For the first time in years, Clara let herself be vulnerable in public. And in that vulnerability, the room shifted. What had begun as ridicule transformed into reverence. Reporters jotted frantically, investors exchanged glances, and people began to applaud. Not for the wealth around them, but for the child who sang her mother's lullaby and the single dad who stood quietly beside her. Daniel felt Emily squeeze his hand, her face radiant with innocence. For the first time that night, he no longer wanted to leave. The morning after the gala, the air around Carter's garage carried a different weight. The old sign creaked in the breeze, and sunlight spilled across the concrete floor as Daniel wiped down his tools, trying to ground himself in routine. Emily, still humming the lullaby she had sung the night before, sat in her usual corner, sketching cars and hearts on a scrap of cardboard. The world outside had shifted. The papers were already running headlines about the mechanic and the CEO, about the song that silenced a ballroom. Daniel wanted nothing more than to shut it all out. He hadn't asked for attention. All he wanted was to raise his daughter in peace. The sound of expensive tires crunching over gravel made him look up. Clara's car rolled into the lot, the same engine now purring smoothly. She stepped out. Not in a gown this time, but in a simple blouse and trousers. Her hair loose, her face stripped of the public mask. For the first time since they met, she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman searching for something she'd lost long ago. Daniel felt his guard rise, but Emily leapt from her stool and ran to her. Clara bent down, catching the girl in her arms, emotion softening her features. "You were brave last night," she whispered. "You gave me back a piece of my mother I thought I'd never hear again." Emily smiled and slipped her small hand into Clara's, unafraid. Daniel cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the intimacy. But Clara met his gaze directly. "I owe you both more than I can say. That joke I made about marriage, it wasn't fair. It was a shield. I've spent my life being used, being measured by what I could offer instead of who I was. But last night, I saw something different. In you, Daniel. In Emily. Something real." Daniel swallowed hard, his mind flashing back to hospital rooms, to Sarah's frail smile, to promises whispered in the dark. "I'm not looking for anything more than what I already have," he said carefully. "I've got my daughter, and that's enough." Clara nodded, but there was no disappointment in her eyes, only respect. "Maybe that's what makes you different. You don't want anything from me, and that's why I trust you." The conversation might have ended there, but Emily, with the innocence of children who always cut through fear, tugged at their hands and said brightly, "Daddy fixed the engine. Now you two can fix hearts together." The words lingered in the air, heavier than the child knew. Daniel felt his chest tighten, while Clara blinked back tears. Neither answered, but the silence spoke more than words. In the weeks that followed, Clara found herself returning to the garage, not as a client, but as a presence. She shared meals with them, sometimes in the cluttered kitchen of Daniel's modest home, sometimes over takeout boxes spread across the garage workbench. She learned how Emily liked her grilled cheese cut into triangles, how Daniel always paused for a moment before starting a job as if listening for the machine's story. Slowly, walls began to crumble. Daniel admitted the ache of raising Emily alone, the nights when grief pressed too heavy to bear. Clara confessed her loneliness, the hollow victories of boardroom battles won without anyone waiting at home to share them. Somewhere between oil-stained rags and corporate reports, they discovered a rhythm together. Not romance at first, but trust. a bond rooted in the shared act of surviving loss. Out of this bond grew something bigger. Clara proposed they start a foundation together, using her resources and Daniel's name, the Fixing Hearts Fund. Its mission would be to support children who had lost parents and single mothers and fathers trying to build stable homes. Daniel resisted at first, but when Emily overheard and clapped her hands in delight, he relented. Soon, the garage became more than a workplace. It became the heart of a movement, a place where other children laughed, where scholarships were announced, where broken families found mending. Months later, on a crisp spring morning, Clara returned to the garage once more, holding nothing but a cup of coffee and a smile that was no longer guarded. She found Daniel under the hood of another car, Emily beside him with her notebook. For a moment, she simply watched, feeling at home in a place she once thought beneath her. Daniel straightened, wiping his brow, and their eyes met. This time, there was no challenge, no armor, no jokes. Only the quiet recognition of two people who had walked through loss and found, against all odds, the possibility of something new. Emily skipped between them, slipping her hand into both theirs, completing a circle. "See?" she said with the certainty only a child could hold. "Daddy fixed the engine. Now you're fixing hearts." The sunlight caught them then, warm and unrelenting, pouring across the garage floor like a blessing. For Daniel, for Clara, for Emily, it was not the end of a story, but the beginning of one worth telling. In the end, it wasn't just an engine that Daniel fixed, it was hearts. A single dad's quiet strength and a child's innocent words reminded a powerful woman that love isn't found in wealth or promises, but in the simple act of showing up for each other. And maybe that's a message we all need today. What do you think? Can love truly be rebuilt from the most unexpected places? Share your thoughts with us below, and if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey of hope and second chances.